Empowered Mothers Network, and welcome to another of these coffee break conversations. This one is episode 10 now. So yeah, firstly, apologies if I sound a bit bassy today. So I've got a stinking cold. I've not been very well over the last couple of days, so my voice is a bit graty. So hopefully it will stay the course today. I'll keep sipping my coffee. So today I wanted to talk about healing trauma through the generations. Just like a coffee break conversation type thing, really. What I did want to say was, if I can't have entire conversations forever on a monologue, so I'd love to chat to other people about kind of have the conversations that they need having at the moment as well, relating to wellness, motherhood, spirituality. So yeah, just shoot me an email. It's sarah@empoweredmothersnetwork.com if you would be interested in being on the podcast, basically, and we can take it from there. But this one today is about healing trauma through the generations. So, is trauma passed down through the generations? That's something that, you can Google it. So let's Google it. If you Google, is trauma passed down genetically? The first answer that comes up is intergenerational trauma is believed to pass from one generation to the next through genetic changes to a person's DNA after they experience trauma. There is some evidence that these genetic markers are passed on to a person's offspring. So probably if you clicked on this to listen to this, you've maybe already got an interest in like ancestral healing or whichever sort of, there's different facets of looking at it, isn't there? There's like ancestral healing if you're looking at it from the kind of spiritual healing perspective, and intergenerational trauma. But whichever way you look at it, you've probably clicked on this because you've got an interest in it. So you may or may not have, you probably have a very vague idea of what it is, and this idea that like our kind of emotional trauma, wounds, baggage, if you want to call it that, can be passed down through the generations. So there are things, we sort of accumulate in this lifetime, and there are things that maybe haven't quite come from our personal life experience and have been passed down. And I think you tend to become aware of this sort of potential of intergenerational trauma once you start working on your own healing journey, and once you kind of, when you get to that place where you're sort of, things are coming up, and you're recognizing more of like the signs of things coming up and presenting themselves to you, and really getting an idea of knowing what's your stuff and what somebody else's. So like if you do Reiki, for example, or energy healing or something like that, you'd be aware of the times, like sometimes you can, if you're not sort of grounded and centered and in your own energy, you can sometimes pick up other people's stuff, so it's having that sort of discernment between what's come from you and what's maybe, you're feeling, but it's from somewhere that doesn't feel quite like it's yours. So these are some of the signs that come to you, that maybe there are issues that have been passed down the generation for healing. And to be honest, I think probably every single one of us has at least one issue that has probably passed down through the generations, because that's just part of the human experience. We're kind of here to like learn and you make mistakes. It's just part of the course, really. So there's pretty much universally something or other that has caused trauma and passed down perhaps and needs healing. So yeah, there's that feeling. That's one of the signs of sort of feeling like echoes of emotions that don't quite belong to you. And then, yeah, as I say, if you're getting more aware of recognizing sort of trauma coming up in yourself, or patterns of thinking and things that aren't serving you well as you progress, that you also might start to see those patterns of like dysfunctional patterns maybe in a wider context than just in your own personal life. So you might start to see them being repeated. If you were to look back down your family line, you might see something's causing an issue in your life, and you might see that like your dad did the same thing, or your auntie behaved the same way with her kids, or your grandparents, or something like that. You might start to see those patterns. And sometimes if you can go back in your family tree or sideways, and all different angles that you can go, you might see it sort of peppered through. If you've got that access to that much information in your family tree, you might sort of see it peppered through, and see these patterns kind of repeating. Another sign is sort of, sometimes we can have like really strong fears and anxieties about certain things. And, sometimes these can be traced back to childhood, and things that happened to us in childhood, which have, caused fears and anxieties that happen to us now in adult life. But sometimes, you might not be able to get a marker on that. You might not be aware of anything that happened in your own childhood. It might be something, a particular situation, a particular fear, like fear of being away from your children, for example. That's just something like that, where you don't necessarily know why that might be, that you feel so strongly about it. And again, if that's coupled with that maybe background knowing that although you feel very strongly about it, it's not necessarily just come from you, and it feels like it might be part of a wider spectrum of feeling. I think a good example, particularly in women, of something that definitely, again, things, we've got the roots in society today because of society now, and that also combines with, history in the past. And a good example is in women, like a lack of voice, which I'm displaying perfectly physically today. A lot of women struggle with like a lack of voice, a lack of boundaries, not being able to sort of say no to people, people pleasing, not being able to stand up for themselves and say, hey, I want to do this, or I feel like this. Or I think a lot of that can stem from, as well, there's the ancestral side of things, where, in history women have been put down and kind of, even violently silenced in many cultures, and I think that has rippled down. That's such a long time, and so many different cultures, that it passes down. And nowadays, some parts of society, some cultures, where we've made, real progress in that area, and some not so much. But it's probably generalising. If you're in modern Western society, it can be easier nowadays to have a bit more of a voice and boundaries, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we do have that. And obviously, ancestral, generational, intergenerational trauma isn't the only reason for that. There's a multitude of reasons and facets to that, as there are with many things, but it can be, I think, one facet of it, that we've just been sort of suppressed and silenced for so long that we've almost forgotten how to find our voice, and now we're kind of having to relearn it. So yeah, some of these things do stem from our own childhoods and what happened to us in our personal lives early on as we were developing, but some I think do go further back. And even if something did sort of, you know, you can recognise, oh, this happened because of this event in my childhood, or because I was treated like this when I was a kid. The reason that you were treated like that was probably because of unhealed wounds with your own parents, which again ties into the intergenerational trauma. So it might be that, you know, there's these patterns been passed down, and it's been passed down to one or both of your parents, and then that's played out and caused the issues or the trauma or whatever has happened during your own childhood. Now, I think as well, we can get too caught up, if we're not careful, in kind of where things have come from. So, you know, you might be aware of a lack of love or something like that, for example, in being a problem in either your childhood, or, you know, you can recognise that's been passed down through the generations. But then I think we can, if we're not careful, get too kind of shoehorned into, well, why did that happen? And there's obviously the psychology side behind it, which I claim to have absolutely no knowledge of whatsoever. I just want to have these conversations and, you know, put these ideas out for people to think about and maybe explore further themselves, as I have done. So we can, you know, if we get too caught up in the mind again, as some of us often do, we can get to the point where it becomes too much like Sherlock Holmes type thing. And why did this happen? Where exactly has it come from? Which person originated with it? What happened to them? And, you know, you can dig down rabbit holes for many a time doing that. And it's not necessarily important, I don't think, that you know exactly where things originated from in order to heal them. I think the most important thing is if you can recognise that something is an issue, and then, okay, acknowledge it, and then how do I take steps to heal that so that it's not causing issues in my own life and I can live to like the fullest expression of myself. So I think these things are still worth healing, you know, even if you had strained relationships with your parents and, you know, you don't want to go back to them now and speak to them about things. You know, some people are adopted, so they won't know their birth parents and they won't be able to contact them. There's loads of different situations where, you know, you can't necessarily just sit down around the table and unpick everything as a family. But I think it's still, well, probably even more so, worth doing the healing on yourself. And again, you know, all we can do is start with ourselves. There may be that as you work on your own healing, it does bring up things with other family members. I mean, you might have noticed that as you work on your own healing journey, it changes the relationships that you have with people around you, people close to you, people related to you. So it can, you know, sometimes even trigger things in them that they may well not be consciously aware of. But I think regardless of, you know, whether you have strained relationships or no relationships, I think for me the biggest main reason for looking into intergenerational trauma and looking into ancestral healing as well, because I'm approaching it from like a spiritual perspective as well, is that I don't want the patterns to be continued, basically. You know, nobody wants to, you know, once you've acknowledged these like dysfunctional patterns and aspects maybe of yourself, you don't want to pass them down and those behaviours down and those parenting behaviours down to your children. You don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that, because I don't think that healing on like an ancestral level is easy or straightforward. And like any kind of healing, it brings it's hard. It brings up stuff that you might have want to just have buried, or stuff that you didn't even really consciously know about. But if you have that main reason of I don't want this, stops with me, I don't want this to go any further, you might want to ask yourself, is like contacting ancestors, people who have passed on, something you feel would be useful in helping you heal these patterns. And also, I'm reading a book at the moment called, I think it's Healing Ancestral Karma by Stephen Farmer. I'm reading that at the moment. And that is sort of saying that as you work on healing these patterns, these dysfunctional patterns, you're not only healing yourself, and therefore the book stops with you and you're stopping it passing down further down the line, but you're also helping to heal those who came before you, those who have passed on. And also, if you're looking at it from like a soul development perspective, that you are, by helping heal those patterns, you're also helping that soul evolve as well as your own soul. So yeah, approaching it from ancestral healing and reading up about that is a really useful thing. And if you know, when I talk about like contacting ancestors and things, people who have passed on, I'm not talking about like sitting around a Ouija board or whatever. You know, there's I'm going to list a few books anyway that are quite useful, but ways of just sort of, even just sort of connecting with the spirit or the essence of somebody maybe that you've lost. What I would say and suggest that is useful as well is to kind of like nerd out on your family tree. So yeah, I've been working on my family tree for 20 years, and I also had somebody else in my family who did a lot of work on the family tree, which I kind of merged with mine. So I've got quite a lot of information on my own ancestral history, which is great. But yeah, you can go online now to like Ancestry, and there are other websites now as well, where you can kind of get going a bit with your family tree. So I don't think you have to, again, you don't have to know specifics, because we can get too caught up in that, but it can be interesting to have a little bit more knowledge of your family tree if you are able to access that information, and then sort of find out, you know, who parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and then other family members too are. If you've got any like living relatives, it's a good time to see if you can get any sort of anecdotal or verbal information, and that's best from living relatives. A lot of them will have, you know, stories that might on the surface just seem everyday kind of stories and not very exciting, but they might start uncovering little nuggets of information or clues, and you can kind of get an idea then of you know, somebody's personality, and maybe that could give you a few clues to, oh, that person sounds like, you know, this situation I'm dealing with might have been an issue in their life as well, or with their children, or with their parents. So yeah, always, I think if you can try sourcing kind of family stories from people who are still alive, that's always really useful. So I said I was going to recommend a couple of books, because again, these are sort of conversations about topics, and I am not for a second purporting, I'm not for a second purporting to have all the answers. I'll save that for certain people on Instagram. So some of the books I would recommend, and some places to start looking and finding out a bit more information and going a bit deeper and taking some steps forwards with this, are It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. There's a book called Ancestral Healing Made Easy as well by Natalia O'Sullivan and Terry O'Sullivan. That's on Amazon as well. And then Ancestral Medicine, which is by Daniel Four. That's a good one. And then there's the one that I recommended before, which I'm reading now, which is Healing Ancestral Karma by Stephen Farmer, I think. Yeah, the first one I mentioned, which was It Didn't Start With You, is by Mark Wolin. Wolin. Yeah. So, there's a few books basically on Amazon there that are good. So in terms of where to go once you know about these kind of patterns, I think once you can like identify an unhealthy pattern and you're aware of it, you can recognize it and acknowledge it, it's then sort of becomes available for healing. So again, it depends on what perspective you take from it, whether you would go down like a talking route with it, or whether you're approaching it again from maybe a semi-spiritual perspective. I do energy work personally, so like a combination of Reiki and energy healing, sort of, I guess you could call it like connected more to the earth, like earth energy, especially sort of from the locality that I live in. And I tend to use that energy work and use mainly the chakra system as a good sort of base chakra. It's a good base framework to work with when you're doing energy healing and sort of removing stuck patterns. I feel like energy healing is quite a good place to start as well if you're, you can kind of step your toe in gently into the water of healing these things, because we don't want to go in too gung-ho and like, right, let's warrior mode, let's get this sorted, and then just be confronted with a barrage of shadow stuff to contend with, and then have a epic healing crisis and things like that. So you don't want to go in too gung-ho, but yeah, energy healing is works with you and what stage you're at and where you're at, and we always have, I think, some conscious choice in this of how comfortable and how far we are willing to go. Because I would never, if you have like had genuine sort of trauma in your childhood or abuse, you've obviously got to, if you're on a healing path, you maybe have to really take it slowly and gently with yourself, because you've got a lot to unpack there. So I feel like working with the chakra system is a really sort of good place to start. And because each chakra is, pertains to a particular mental and emotional, physical thing, they all have their different correspondences. You can then kind of, focus on one, maybe if you know an area that needs healing. So an example would be if you've picked up in your ancestral line that there was a lack of love and being available to love, and people were very guarded with their hearts, and they couldn't fully express love to the children, and then that kept getting passed down the line, things like that. Emotional distance from people, then if you were working with your chakra system, you say, well, in that case, I know that a good place to start for me would be working on the heart chakra, and maybe slowly and gently opening that up and regaining balance, and doing a lot of healing work there. If you acknowledge this thing of women being silenced and suppressed, maybe in your family, and back in the day, I think a lot of women were expected to do certain roles and maybe gave up a lot of their own hopes and dreams and goals because they were expected to sort of stay at home and have a family. And so, if you feel like that was a pattern in your family where women were shut down or put down or silenced, or then that might be something to work with the throat chakra and finding your voice, and healing around the throat. If you have something like to do with power, personal power, then you're looking at the sort of lower two chakras. So it's a good framework to work with, I feel, as a starting point at least. But yeah, these are just sort of my thoughts on ancestral healing. So, I mean, I'd love to hear from people who've maybe, done some healing already of their own, and what sort of techniques you used, and what sort of patterns you're finding, and how we are maybe saying that the book stops with us, and how we are going about making sure that we don't pass these patterns down. Yeah, this is great. All interesting stuff, and all part of the healing journey that we're all on. So if you enjoyed this podcast, there will be another one in a couple of weeks. The best way to keep up with the podcast now is either join the email list, and the latest podcast episode will be emailed out to you with any other news or updates or useful articles. So you can join the mailing list by going to the website empoweredmothersnetwork.com, or just subscribe on YouTube to the channel, and you can get the next podcast episode. But yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on ancestral healing and intergenerational trauma. So thanks very much for listening, and I will hopefully see you soon.